4 men chase down a group of terrified girls, and it's immediately clear their intentions are far from good. Before things can escalate any further, Ark drops in seemingly out of nowhere and starts taking the men out one after another, calmly and without hesitation. He doesn't bother explaining himself to anyone, not even when one of the men manages to ask who he even is, before getting knocked out cold. It's a brutal, efficient takedown, and Ark barely has a second to feel satisfied with himself before the next problem arrives. Almost immediately, a wave of monsters comes charging through, being chased down by an already visibly furious Ariane, who clearly wasn't expecting to run straight into Ark in the middle of all this. Chiome and Ponta show up right on her heels, and the 4 of them make quick work of the remaining creatures, combining fire, water, and lightning magic in a fight that barely takes any time at all. Ark, ever the optimist, tries to brush the whole thing off as another problem solved, but Ariane isn't having it. She immediately calls him out, pointing out that this exact kind of reckless, attention-grabbing heroism is the reason they keep ending up in these situations in the first place. From the way she reacts, it's obvious this isn't the first time she's had this exact argument with him, and it probably won't be the last either. After the fight, a handful of soldiers try to step in and stop them, but they're dealt with just as easily as the monsters were. The group eventually reaches a village where a father, overwhelmed with gratitude for having his daughters rescued, insists on rewarding them with an enormous feast, and mentions in passing that the town happens to have its own hot spring. Ark's immediately excited at the idea of relaxing in the water, until a fairly major problem occurs to him. Underneath the human-looking exterior he's been walking around in, he's actually a full skeleton, and both eating in public and bathing with others risks completely blowing his cover. To avoid disaster, he arranges to have a private bath and makes it very clear to everyone around him that no one is to come anywhere near it until he's finished. Naturally, that plan falls apart almost instantly. Ariane and Chiome, looking for the correct bathing area, accidentally wander straight into his bath instead, leading to a chaotic, embarrassing scramble. Once the dust settles, and everyone's had a moment to recover, Ariane uses the opportunity to properly call Ark out. This time, not for reckless fighting, but for constantly losing focus on their real objective, which is reaching the cursed spring that could potentially restore his human form for good. She rattles off a whole list of past detours he's taken along the way, everything from helping random strangers to breaking up an entire gang of jewel thieves, framing it as a pattern rather than a one-off. Ark doesn't really try to defend himself beyond admitting that he simply can't bring himself to ignore people who need help, which Chiome finds more endearing than annoying, admitting that trait is honestly part of why she likes having him around. It's also during this conversation that we learn the spring itself may carry deep personal significance for Chiome, potentially tied to her own mission of locating her tribe's long-lost homeland, which adds a bit more weight to Ark's promise to stay on task going forward. Determined to actually follow through this time, the group heads toward the next village, with every intention of staying focused, only for the plan to derail again almost immediately. The moment they arrive, something feels off. Villagers seem visibly frightened just at the sight of them, reacting with fear rather than curiosity. Ark ends up healing a young boy who collapsed while trying to flee from them, expecting at least a little gratitude in return. Instead, the boy's mother reacts with outright fear, mistaking the group for a dangerous pair who've reportedly been terrorizing the region and abducting people under the guise of a so-called Silver Knight and a cruel dark elf. It quickly becomes clear that someone has been running around impersonating Ark and Ariane specifically in order to commit crimes under their names, and Ariane, understandably, is furious about it. She wants to know exactly where to find these imposters, and she wants to know immediately. Rather than storming in and confronting the fake duo head-on, Ariane and Chiome decide on a smarter, sneakier approach, letting themselves get deliberately captured by the imposter gang so they can be led directly to wherever the operation is based. They put on a surprisingly convincing act, playing up fear and helplessness, and the gang members, thrilled at what they believe is a valuable haul consisting of an elf and a beast human, start hauling them away without a second thought. What follows is a genuinely uncomfortable stretch. The gang mistreats their so-called captives, with one member getting inappropriately handsy with the fake Ariane, while the imposter posing as Ark arrogantly compares his own physique to the real ones, clearly enjoying showing off in front of his crew. Underneath her convincing performance, Ariane's fury is very clearly building toward a boiling point. In between all of this, the story briefly shifts focus to introduce Princess Yuriana, who is shown asking her older sister Seriana for permission to secretly go meet with someone. She reassures her sister that having the protection of an elf elder means her half-brother won't be able to move against her directly, and explains that her real motivation is simply wanting to understand the nature of the enemy for herself, rather than relying on second-hand information. It's a short scene, clearly meant to plant seeds for something bigger down the line, rather than resolve anything within this episode itself. Back at the imposter gang's hideout, the gang leader is in the middle of celebrating what he thinks is an excellent catch when he suddenly recognizes the fake Ark as the exact same man who had already been beaten up earlier by the real duo. The realization lands a beat too late. These aren't helpless captives at all. They're the very people his entire gang has been impersonating this whole time. A fight breaks out almost immediately between the real and fake versions of Ark and Ariane. The imposters talk a big game about their own strength, right up until the moment they're completely and effortlessly outmatched. The Ark knocks his double away with a single devastating hit, and Ponta gets a satisfying moment of payback of his own against the group that's been using their names. As the defeated imposter tries to flee the scene, Ark and Ariane immediately give chase, while Chiome stays behind to free the other captives still being held at the hideout. Cornered with nowhere left to run, the fleeing imposter reveals that his earlier defeat wasn't an accident at all. He claims he intentionally lured the pair here specifically to get revenge. He then summons an entire horde of goblins, led by an imposing goblin lord, momentarily catching Ark and Ariane off guard. Ark, oddly delighted about encountering goblins for the very first time in this world, casually launches into an explanation of their nature, describing their rapid breeding, their aggressive tendencies, how they're relatively weak on an individual basis but genuinely dangerous when attacking in coordinated groups, and their unsettling habit of specifically targeting human women. Despite being badly outnumbered, Ark and Ariane make short work of the entire horde. Ark cuts down the Goblin Lord in a single clean strike, while Ariane finishes off the imposter himself with a decisive, no-nonsense counterattack. Then, despite Ariane's direct warning against using terrain-based magic in the immediate area, Ark goes ahead and does it anyway, triggering a massive explosion that ends the fight almost instantly. Predictably, Ark calls the whole encounter easy, and just as predictably, Ariane insists that it absolutely was not. With the fight finally over, the group hands the surviving gang members over to the soldiers and starts piecing together everything they've learned. The trafficking ring, it turns out, has been selling elves and beast humans to buyers from other countries, and the goblins were never actually being controlled by the imposter at all. They were supplied by a much larger network, and were simply following orders passed down the chain. This strongly suggests a far bigger operation is at play behind everything that's happened so far. As the group prepares to move on from the village, Chiome decides to make a detour to her own homeland to gather more information related to her personal mission, while Ariane asks for a quick stop of her own, without offering any explanation as to why just yet, leaving that particular thread open for later. The second episode opens on a completely different note, focusing on an unfamiliar woman sitting alone in a dark, dimly lit cellar, quietly grinding up some kind of herb. Before the show gives us any real context about who she is or what she's doing, the scene abruptly cuts away to our main duo, Ark and Maple, as they arrive in a brand new city. They quickly learn that the local ruling lord, a human, has recently married an elf, and the two of them have come specifically to offer their congratulations in person. Ark openly admits he's genuinely surprised that a human and an elf would end up married, while Maple is far more skeptical from the start, immediately suspecting that the marriage might not have been consensual on the elf's side at all. She argues that if the lord had simply refused to meet with them, it would practically confirm her suspicions, and insists that regardless, they should investigate the situation themselves rather than take anything at face value. Just as Ark starts to concede that Maple might have a legitimate point, the entire mood shifts, trumpets sound, and the two of them are welcomed warmly and enthusiastically into the mansion. The Lord greets them personally and with obvious sincerity, and it becomes immediately clear that this isn't some forced or staged arrangement. When his elf wife appears, she comes across as relaxed, gracious, and genuinely thankful for their visit, which further undercuts Maple's initial suspicion almost right away. The couple even offers food to Ark and Maple, though Maple insists on getting some actual conversation out of the way first. The Lord, meanwhile, can barely stop himself from gushing about how wonderful his wife is, praising her so enthusiastically and repeatedly that it almost starts to feel excessive, but the underlying sincerity makes it obvious the relationship is completely genuine. Still, something continues to nag at Maple. She'd heard that the previous ruler of this city was fairly old, so she's confused about how this clearly much younger man ended up in charge so suddenly. The Lord explains everything patiently. His father used to actively persecute elves throughout the region, and once he discovered the full extent of it, he opposed him completely. When his father refused to listen or change course, he ended up conspiring with several local leaders to remove him from power entirely, specifically to ensure no other race would continue to be mistreated under his rule. He then took over as Lord in his father's place. Maple quickly realizes that the current ruler is nothing at all like his predecessor, and it's revealed that the deposed father has since been locked away in the highest room of the castle as a form of punishment for his past actions. We also learn that the marriage itself actually grew directly out of this entire conflict. The Lord met his now wife while actively working to stop his father's cruelty toward elves, and fell in love with her somewhere along the way. Maple is genuinely impressed by all of this, calling it a remarkably admirable thing to have done, and Ark suggests they finally sit down and eat, since everything now seems to be perfectly fine. Just as they're getting ready to leave though, the Lord stops them and admits he actually needs to ask for a favor. Maple, confused since everything appeared to be going smoothly, asks what could possibly still be wrong. He explains that the entire point of the public marriage was to demonstrate to people that unions between different races are entirely possible and legitimate. But lately, something has clearly gone wrong behind the scenes. Recent incidents have left him genuinely afraid for his wife's safety. He describes finding a dangerous snake hidden in his wife's bed just a few days earlier, and shortly after that, discovering that a maid who had tasted his wife's food found poison mixed into it. Maple immediately concludes that whoever is responsible has to be someone living inside the household itself, since it would be nearly impossible for an outsider to slip a poisonous snake into a heavily guarded bedroom or contaminate food from outside the castle. The Lord confirms that's exactly what worries him most, and formally asks for their help in catching whoever's behind it. Maple agrees without hesitation, and Ark backs up her logic, pointing out that given how secure the castle clearly is, the culprit almost certainly has to be someone already living inside its walls. They agree to stay behind and properly investigate, with the Lord's own deposed father standing out as the most obvious potential suspect, still living somewhere in the castle despite officially losing his position. Maple explains she'll need some time to look into things properly before drawing any real conclusions, and the two of them settle in to begin their investigation. Before they part ways for the moment, the Lord adds one more request. He genuinely wants to eventually make the marriage fully public, hoping to prove to skeptics, including people who think exactly like his own father once did, that marrying outside one's own race carries no shame at all, and that other races are every bit as worthy of respect as humans are. It's clear from how he explains it that this marriage carries real symbolic weight for him personally, far beyond simple happiness, and Maple is visibly moved by the sincerity behind it. That night, taking full advantage of the fact that this particular coastal city offers genuinely excellent lobster and fresh fish, Ark is thoroughly enjoying himself at dinner, seemingly without a care in the world. Maple calls him out almost immediately for relaxing so much when they're supposed to be actively working on a case. Ark insists he fully understands what's at stake, pointing out that this marriage is meant to send a genuinely important message to the wider world, and asks Maple directly what she thinks their plan should actually be. She explains that gathering solid information has to come first before anything else, and Ark agrees to take responsibility for handling the investigating side of things himself. 3 full days pass, and by the 3rd day, Ark is once again casually enjoying a large meal without much urgency. When Maple asks how the investigation is actually progressing, He walks her through everything he's done so far. On the very first day, he spotted a guard behaving suspiciously out in a secluded part of the grounds, only to discover, after confronting him directly, that the man had simply been quietly writing a love letter and nothing more sinister than that. Maple isn't especially impressed by this, but Ark continues explaining. On another day, he noticed a kitchen worker acting oddly suspicious, specifically around poisonous substances. When questioned directly, the man revealed he'd actually been researching antidotes, just in case the Lord's wife was ever poisoned again, so he could respond immediately and save her life. That effectively clears the kitchen staff of any wrongdoing as well. Frustrated at this point, Maple asks who could possibly still be responsible if it isn't the guard, and it isn't the kitchen staff either. Ark mentions one final oddity that had been bothering him. Along the way, they both noticed a talking parrot saying some genuinely strange things. Maple immediately realizes she's heard something related to that exact parrot before. She recalls spotting an empty cage somewhere inside the mansion during their earlier tour, and remembers that when they'd asked the Lord about it directly, he explained it had once belonged to a pet parrot owned by his father, though the bird had apparently flown away sometime after his father lost power. Putting all the pieces together, Maple becomes fully convinced that the deposed father is somehow behind everything that's been happening. Ark asks what their next move should be, and Maple reveals she already has a plan worked out. Meanwhile, we cut to the deposed father still locked away in his room, insisting to himself that none of this is genuinely his son's fault, placing all the blame squarely on the elf instead, and stating outright that he intends to eliminate her entirely. Maple sneaks a large wooden crate into his room, under the simple pretense that it's just being used as extra storage, then quickly leaves the area. When the old man, out of pure frustration, ends up kicking the crate, it splits open unexpectedly, revealing Ark hidden inside the whole time, disguised as a strange, unremarkable-looking mummy, specifically so the old man wouldn't suspect anything was amiss. That night, Ark quietly watches as the father speaks directly to his parrot, giving it a detailed message outlining exactly how the next planned attack should be carried out. It fully confirms he's been behind everything from the start, and the parrot flies off carrying the message with it. The next morning, when the father wakes up, he's stunned to discover that the disguised skeleton has completely vanished from where it had been left. Having already sent out multiple assassins ahead of time, the next day, as the Lord travels through part of the city, he's suddenly surrounded and attacked without warning. Ark arrives at exactly the right moment to save him. Meanwhile, the Lord's wife, traveling nearby, is actually Maple in disguise, using the elf wife's appearance as a convincing decoy, specifically to draw out and eliminate the remaining attackers one by one, which she manages efficiently and without much trouble. Separately, the real wife, Teresia, heads out on her own to visit the very maid who had been poisoned earlier. Around the same time, Ark finishes off the last of the assassins and briefly assumes everything's now fully resolved, genuinely relieved that the Lord made it out safely. But Maple suddenly asks the Lord exactly where his wife currently is. He explains she's gone to visit that same maid, out in the northern outskirts of the city, which happens to be the exact area where that particular type of poison is known to originate from. Maple immediately realizes Teresia's life could be in serious danger and urges Ark to teleport them there as quickly as possible, which he does repeatedly in rapid succession to close the distance in time. Meanwhile, the maid is shown quietly preparing tea for Teresia, secretly poisoning it before serving it to her. Fortunately, Ark moves fast enough that they arrive just in the nick of time. Maple grabs the tea before Teresia can take a single sip and pours it directly onto a nearby plant, which instantly withers and dies, definitively confirming the tea had been poisoned all along. Maple then reveals the full truth of the situation. It's actually the maid who has been behind every single attempt on Teresia's life from the very beginning. Teresia is genuinely shocked by this revelation, since she'd always trusted this particular woman completely without question. Maple explains that the maid had deliberately staged the earlier poisoning incident specifically to earn Teresia's trust, ensuring she'd feel safe enough to visit her again later, at which point the real, final attack could actually succeed. Confronted directly with the truth, the maid admits to everything without much resistance, explaining simply that she cannot bring herself to accept a human marrying an elf under any circumstances. She attempts to flee the scene and take her own life out of shame, but Ark physically stops her, telling her there's genuinely no need to die over this, insisting she still has real value and could go on to contribute something meaningful in the future, instead of ending things here. With the entire plot now fully resolved, Ark and Maple prepare to finally leave the city behind. The Lord and his wife thank them warmly and sincerely, telling them to reach out personally if there's ever anything they can do to return the favor in the future. As Ark and Maple set off toward the next town, they encounter yet another messenger parrot along the way, this one carrying a fresh message from someone named Denka. The message reports that large numbers of beastmen and elves are currently being sold somewhere nearby, and urges them to look into it directly. With this new lead firmly in hand, Ark and Maple head off once again on their next journey.